The question hung in the air between us like a blade waiting to drop. Dante Vallo's hand remained cupped against my jaw, surprisingly gentle for a man whose knuckles bore scars that told stories of violence. His thumb brushed carefully below the bruise blooming across my cheekbone, and I felt the tremor in his fingers, not fear, but fury barely leashed. I should have lied. God knows I'd become an expert at it over the past 3 years. I could have given him a name plucked from the dozens of minor players in his organization, some soldier dumb enough to cross a line. He would have believed me. Would have probably dragged the poor bastard into this very alley and painted the bricks with his regrets. But looking into those burnt coffee eyes, I realized something that made my blood run colder than the autumn wind cutting through my torn dress. I was tired of running. Tired of the motels and the dye jobs and the burner phones. Tired of flinching at shadows and sleeping with one eye open. And if I was going to die tonight, really die, not just survive to run another day, then the truth would die with me. The thing that had been growing like cancer in the heart of New York's underworld, the secret I'd stumbled into that night 3 years ago when I was just a paralegal filing papers in the wrong office at the wrong time. Elena. His voice dropped lower, and I heard the edge in it now. The voice that made grown men confess to sins they hadn't even committed yet. I asked you a question. My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. Around us, the alley seemed to hold its breath. Even the distant traffic noise faded to nothing, as if the city itself was waiting for my answer. The council, I whispered. The effect was immediate and devastating. Dante's hand fell away from my face like I'd burned him. He took a step back, and for the first time since he'd walked into this alley radiating lethal confidence, I saw something flicker across his features that looked almost like fear. What did you just say? His voice had gone quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded executions. I forced myself to stand straighter despite the screaming pain in my ribs. You heard me. The council. They're the ones who did this. They're the ones who've been hunting me for 3 years. And they're the reason your city is about to burn from the inside out. He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the calculation happening behind those whiskey-dark eyes. Most men in his position would have laughed, called me crazy, maybe put a bullet in my head just to tie up loose ends. But Dante Vallo hadn't built an empire by dismissing intelligence, no matter how impossible it seemed. The council is a myth, he said finally, but his tone carried no conviction. A ghost story the old-timers tell to scare the new recruits. 5 families supposedly above the 5 families, pulling strings from the shadows. Bullshit. Is it? I pushed off the wall, ignoring the way my vision swam. Then explain the offshore accounts that never show up in any ledger. The shipments that move through ports without manifests. The names of made men who vanish without anyone asking questions. I took a step toward him, reckless now. Explain the tattoo every one of their operatives carries. A circle of 5 serpents, usually hidden where only another member would see it. His jaw clenched. How do you know about? Because I saw the books, Dante. All of them. 3 years ago, I was processing estate documents for a lawyer named Marcus Vitali. You remember him? Of course you do. He committed suicide 2 weeks after I copied his files. I laughed, and it came out bitter. Except it wasn't suicide, and those files weren't about estates. They were ledgers. Records going back 40 years. Proof that every major decision in this city's underworld, every territory dispute, every peace treaty, every war, was orchestrated by 5 people who don't officially exist. The muscle in Dante's jaw twitched. Around us, I heard the soft scuff of footsteps. His men, materializing from the shadows at the mouth of the alley. 3 of them, hands hovering near concealed weapons, waiting for their boss's signal. And you've been sitting on this information for 3 years, Dante said slowly. Living like a rat in the walls while the most powerful men in the city hunt you. Why not go to the FBI? The media? Because the council owns them too. I met his gaze steadily. I tried once, in the beginning. Walked into a federal building in Philadelphia with a USB drive and a story. 2 agents took my statement. I was picked up 4 hours later by men with FBI badges who put a bag over my head and drove me to a warehouse. I got away barely. Learned my lesson. There's no authority in this country they haven't compromised. Dante was silent for a long moment, and I could see him processing, fitting pieces together in his mind. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new weight. The Castellano hit last year. Everyone said it was the Russians. It wasn't. The Brooklyn ports that suddenly opened up to the Yakuza. Council decision. My consigliera's heart attack 3 months ago. I just looked at him. Something dark and terrible crossed Dante Vallo's face, and in that moment, I understood why men feared him. Not because of the violence he could unleash, but because of the cold, calculating intelligence behind it. Names, he said quietly. Give me names. I smiled, though it hurt my split lip. That's the problem, Dante. I don't know their names. Nobody does. That's what makes them so dangerous. I paused. But I know someone in your organization does. Someone close to you. Someone who's been feeding them information for years. Who? That, I said, is why they want me dead. Because I'm 3 files away from finding out. The penthouse smelled like leather and old money and danger. Dante's hand stayed firm on the small of my back as we stepped out of the private elevator, his touch simultaneously protective and proprietary. His men had swept the building twice before we'd even left the alley, and the ride-up had been silent except for the hushed conversations happening through his earpiece. I'd expected something cold and modern, all glass and chrome like the hedge fund offices that dotted Manhattan. Instead, the space sprawled before us in dark wood and deep burgundy, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that made my chest tight. From up here, New York looked almost peaceful, the lights twinkling like promises instead of threats. Guest room is through there. Dante nodded toward a hallway. Bathroom stocked. Don't touch the windows, don't go near the balcony, and for God's sake, don't try to leave. He shed his suit jacket, draping it over a chair that probably cost more than I'd made in a year of running. The shoulder holster underneath was black leather, the gun nestled in it matte and deadly. I didn't move. My legs felt like they might give out if I took another step, and the adrenaline that had carried me through the alley was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Dante glanced back, and something in his expression shifted. Sit down before you fall down. I sank onto the nearest chair, grateful. He disappeared into what I assumed was the kitchen and returned with a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. Whiskey, probably older than me and smoother than silk. I took it with shaking hands. Drink. It wasn't a request. The whiskey burned going down but settled the tremors in my fingers. Dante remained standing, arms crossed, watching me with those calculating eyes. He'd loosened his tie, and I could see the full complexity of the tattoo that wound up his neck, serpents and thorns rendered in black ink, beautiful and vicious. So, his voice cut through the silence. The council. You're telling me that everything I've built, every decision I've made, every war I've won, it's all been theater. Puppet strings I was too arrogant to see. Not arrogant. Careful. I took another sip. You survived this long because you're smart. But they've been operating for decades, Dante. Since before you were born. They're embedded so deep in the structure that they're the structure. He moved to the windows, staring out at his city. My father used to tell me stories. Late at night, after too much wine. About the old days, before the commission, before the families organized. He'd talk about the ones who really ran things. The ones who never got their names in the papers or their faces on wanted posters. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. I thought he was drunk and paranoid. He was trying to warn you. He's been dead 12 years. Dante turned back to face me. Car accident. Brakes failed on the West Side Highway. The implication hung between us, heavy and damning. You said someone close to me is feeding them information. He crossed the room with predatory grace, leaning against the wall near my chair. How close? Close enough to know your movements. Close enough to sit in on your private meetings. close enough that you trust them with your life. I met his gaze. I have partial records, financial transactions, coded communications. But the files are incomplete. I need access to your organization's inner circle to cross-reference what I have with what's happening now. You're asking me to suspect my own people. Men I've known for years. Men who've bled with me. I'm telling you that one of them has been bleeding you dry while smiling to your face. His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might throw me back out onto the street. Instead, he pulled out his phone, typed something, and pocketed it again. I have 3 men I trust completely. My consigliere, except he's dead. My underboss, Luca Santoro. And my enforcer, Marco Ricci. Tell me about them. Luca's been with me since the beginning. We grew up in the same neighborhood, ran the same streets. He's the brother I never had. Dante's voice carried the weight of old loyalty. Marco came later, 5 years ago. Former military, dishonorably discharged. He's a stone-cold killer when I need him to be, but he's got a code. I processed this information, matching it against the fragments I'd pieced together over 3 years of hiding. The last transaction I tracked was 2 weeks ago. 50,000 moved through a shell corporation in the Caymans. The authorization code matches the pattern I've seen in communications to council operatives. What pattern? 5 digits. Always prime numbers. Always sequential in the overall scheme. I pulled out the battered phone I'd been carrying, one of a dozen I'd cycled through. Brought up the encrypted file I'd guarded with my life. This transaction used 11-13-17-19-23. Dante's face went very still. Those are code prefixes. Every ranking member in my organization has one. It's how we authorize sensitive operations. Then whoever made that transfer has ranking member access. That's impossible. Those codes don't leave my inner circle. But his voice had lost its certainty. I stood, moving closer to him despite every instinct screaming to keep distance. Dante, listen to me. The council doesn't just have someone in your organization. They have someone in your inner sanctum. Someone who knows how you think, how you operate, who you trust. And they've been using that access to hollow you out from the inside. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. If you're lying to me, if this is some elaborate con, then kill me. I didn't pull away. But you know I'm not lying. You felt it, haven't you? The decisions that don't quite add up. The opportunities that slip away at the last moment. The enemies who know your moves before you make them. He released my wrist, but didn't step back. We stood there in the dim light of his penthouse, 2 people bound by a truth that could destroy us both. My consigliere, Dante said quietly. 3 months ago. They said it was a heart attack. Was he alone when it happened? No. His eyes darkened. Luca was with him. Said he tried CPR, called the ambulance. But by the time they arrived, the unspoken question filled the space between us. I watched Dante wrestle with it, loyalty against survival, trust against evidence. Finally, he pulled out his phone again. We're going to need those files. All of them. They're in a storage unit in Queens. But Dante, if we do this, if we start pulling at this thread, there's no going back. The council will know. And they'll come for both of us. A cold smile touched his lips, the kind that probably made his enemies beg for mercy. Good. Let them come. I've been playing defense for too long. He moved to a concealed panel in the wall, pressed his palm against it. The panel slid open to reveal an arsenal that made my breath catch: guns, knives, ammunition, and equipment I couldn't even name. First rule of survival, Elena, he said, selecting a sleek pistol and checking the chamber. When someone's hunting you in the dark, you drag them into the light and watch them burn. I looked at this man, this dangerous, calculating predator who'd just agreed to go to war against an enemy he couldn't see, and realized something that terrified me more than 3 years of running ever had. I was starting to trust him. I couldn't sleep. The guest room bed was softer than anything I'd touched in years. The sheets probably had a thread count higher than my credit score ever reached, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every creak of the penthouse settling made my heart hammer. Every distant siren pulled me back to the edge of panic I'd lived on for 3 years. So I sat by the window Dante had told me not to touch, staring out at the city, and let myself remember. Let myself go back to the moment when Elena Vasquez, paralegal with student loans and a studio apartment in Queens, became Elena the Ghost. 3 years ago. The Bronx on a Tuesday night in March. I'd been working late again, which wasn't unusual. Marcus Vitale's law office kept paralegal hours that would make sweatshop owners blush, but the pay was decent and I needed every dollar to chip away at the mountain of debt from a law degree I'd never finished. My mother's cancer had seen to that, the medical bills had buried us both, and when she died, I inherited nothing but grief and collection notices. Marcus specialized in estate planning for wealthy clients, or so I'd been told. Old money families with complicated trusts and offshore holdings. I filed papers, organized documents, made sure every T was crossed and every I dotted. I didn't ask questions about why so many of our clients had Italian surnames or why meetings always happened after business hours with men who wore expensive suits and cheaper morals. That night, I'd been alone in the office. Marcus had left hours earlier for a dinner meeting, and I was working through a backlog of documents that needed to be scanned and archived. The kind of mindless work that let my thoughts drift to whether I could afford to fix my car's transmission or if I'd be taking the subway for another year. The file cabinet in Marcus's private office had been left unlocked. That was the first unusual thing. Marcus was meticulous about security, almost paranoid. Everything locked, everything password protected. But that night, the bottom drawer sat slightly ajar, and I could see the edge of a leather portfolio inside. I should have closed it. Should have walked away. Instead, I pulled it open. The portfolio was heavy, expensive leather embossed with a symbol I didn't recognize, 5 serpents arranged in a circle, each one eating the tail of the next. Inside were ledgers, decades of them, going back to the 1980s. Names I recognized from news reports about organized crime. Transactions in amounts that made my student loans look like pocket change. And underneath it all, a structure. A hierarchy that didn't match anything I'd learned about how the Mafia operated. I'd taken criminal law classes before I dropped out. I knew about the 5 families, the commission, the way power supposedly flowed in New York's underworld. But these documents showed something else entirely. 5 individuals, no names, just designations, north, south, east, west, and center, who seemed to control everything. Every family, every territory, every major decision. The council. I'd started photographing pages with my phone, not really understanding what I was doing or why. Some instinct for self-preservation, maybe. Evidence that could protect me if anyone found out I'd seen this. I got through maybe 40 pages before I heard the footsteps. Marcus, returning early. And he wasn't alone. I'd shoved the portfolio back, closed the drawer, and slipped out of his office just as the front door opened. Made it to my desk and pretended to be absorbed in scanning documents, heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Elena. Marcus's voice had carried that false warmth he used with clients. Still here? You work too hard. Just finishing up the Castellano files. I'd kept my eyes on my screen, not trusting my face to lie. The man with him had been tall, silver-haired, wearing a coat that probably cost more than my annual salary. He'd looked at me with eyes that saw everything, calculated everything, and I'd felt my blood turn to ice. This is the paralegal I mentioned, Marcus had said. Elena Vasquez. Very thorough, very discreet. I'm sure. The silver-haired man's voice had been cultured, almost kind. Marcus speaks highly of your attention to detail. I'd smiled, made some innocuous comment, and prayed they couldn't hear the panic screaming in my skull. They'd gone into Marcus's office. The door closed. I'd waited exactly 10 minutes before gathering my things with trembling hands and walking out as calmly as I could manage, certain that at any moment someone would stop me, that hands would grab me from the shadows. Nothing happened. I made it home, triple-locked my door, and spent the night staring at the photographs on my phone, trying to understand what I'd stumbled into. By morning, I knew. The news reported Marcus Vitali's death, apparent suicide, single gunshot wound to the head in his office. Police were investigating, but expected to rule it self-inflicted. I'd packed a bag, withdrawn everything from my bank account, and disappeared before lunch. The first few months were chaos. I'd tried to go to the authorities, convinced myself that the FBI would protect me, that justice still meant something. I'd been so naive. The agents who'd interviewed me in Philadelphia had seemed genuinely concerned, had promised witness protection, had made me feel safe for the first time since Marcus died. Then the men with FBI badges and dead eyes had picked me up 4 hours later. I still had scars on my wrists from the zip ties. Still woke up sometimes feeling the bag over my head, suffocating in my own carbon dioxide. I'd gotten away through dumb luck and the fact that they'd underestimated how hard a woman could fight when she had nothing left to lose. After that, I learned the rules. No authorities. No paper trails. No staying in one place longer than a month. Hair dye and colored contacts and clothes from thrift stores. Waitressing jobs paid under the table, sleeping in my car or cheap motels, always moving, always watching over my shoulder. And the whole time, I'd kept digging. Every public library with internet access became a research station. Every newspaper archive a puzzle piece. I tracked the pattern of the council's operations through the negative space they left behind, the things that didn't make sense, the coincidences that were too convenient, the deaths that were too timely. I'd gotten close 6 months ago. Found a warehouse in Brooklyn where records were being stored, old physical files that hadn't been digitized. Broken in after midnight with a borrowed lockpick set and a prayer. I'd been photographing documents when the security alarm I disabled suddenly reactivated. They'd been waiting for me. Not random guards, but professionals. Men who moved like soldiers and looked at me like I was already dead. I'd run through dark streets with bullets sparking off brick behind me, lost them in a subway station, and spent the next 3 weeks convinced every shadow held a killer. But I'd gotten what I needed. Cross-references. Transaction patterns. Enough to know that someone in Dante Vallo's organization was a council operative. Enough to know that if I could prove it, I could finally stop running. So I'd let myself be found. Staged it carefully, right territory, right time, visible enough to draw attention but vulnerable enough to seem desperate. And Dante had found me, just like I'd hoped. Now, sitting in his penthouse watching the sun rise over a city that had tried to kill me 100 times, I wondered if I'd made a deal with the devil or finally found an ally in hell. The door opened behind me. Dante, already dressed in fresh clothes, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He set one on the windowsill beside me without a word. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Thinking about how I got here. He was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. The council. They've been hunting you for 3 years. You could have left New York, disappeared completely. Why stay? I turned to look at him, this dangerous man who'd somehow become my only chance at survival. Because running doesn't end anything, I said. It just delays the inevitable. And I'm tired of being their victim. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Good. Because today we go to war. The coffee had just touched my lips when the world exploded. The windows didn't shatter inward, they disintegrated. Glass transformed into 1,000 glittering knives as the concussive force of the blast threw me backward off my chair. I hit the floor hard, the cup spinning away, coffee splashing across expensive hardwood that suddenly seemed very far from the most important thing in the room. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. Through the chaos of my scrambled senses, I saw Dante moving, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear. He was on top of me in seconds, his body a shield, and I felt rather than heard the second explosion that shook the entire penthouse. Smoke. Acrid and choking, pouring through the destroyed windows. The morning light filtered through it in sickly orange shafts, and somewhere an alarm was screaming. Or maybe that was just the ringing in my ears. Dante hauled me to my feet with one hand, the other already holding his gun. His lips moved again. I caught fragments of sound now, my hearing returning in painful increments. Basement, move. I stumbled as he pulled me toward the hallway, my legs uncertain beneath me. Behind us, something crashed. Heavy footsteps on broken glass. Not the chaotic sounds of panicked evacuation, but deliberate, measured. Professional. They were all. The room was dark wood and leather, bookshelves lining the walls, a massive desk dominating the center. Dante was already moving to a panel behind the desk, his fingers flying over a keypad. A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing steel and reinforced concrete. Safe room, he said, turning back toward the door. Get in. What about you? I'm going to find out who the hell just declared war on me. His smile was savage. Get in, Elena. Lock it behind me. Code is your birthday backwards. You don't know my birthday. March 15th, 1994. I know everything about you now. He chambered around. Move. I didn't argue. Started toward the safe room just as the study door exploded inward. The figure who entered wore the same black tactical gear as the one Dante had dropped in the hallway, but this one moved differently. Faster. More certain. Professional military, my mind catalogued distantly. Special forces maybe. The rifle came up in a smooth motion that spoke of thousands of hours of training. Dante fired first. The shot went wide as he threw himself sideways behind the desk. Return fire chewed through the wood, splinters exploding like shrapnel. I dove behind a leather armchair that would stop exactly nothing if the shooter decided I was worth the bullets. Elena, go. Dante's voice carried command even under fire. But the shooter had already shifted, and I realized with cold horror that the rifle was tracking toward the safe room entrance. They knew. Of course they knew. They'd planned for this, mapped every possible escape route. I did the only thing I could think of. Grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the side table and hurled it with everything I had. It caught the shooter in the shoulder, barely a distraction, but enough. The rifle barrel dipped for a fraction of a second, and Dante rose from behind the desk like an avenging angel and put 3 rounds center mass. The shooter went down. Didn't get back up. For a moment, the only sound was our ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens. Dante moved to the fallen attacker, kicked the rifle away, and dropped to one knee. He yanked up the tactical mask. The face underneath was young. Too young. Maybe 25, with the kind of clean-cut features that belonged in college recruitment posters, not bleeding out on a crime boss's study floor. I don't know him, Dante said, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. I moved closer, ignoring the way my hands shook. Looked at the dying man's face and felt something click in my memory. The Bronx. 6 months ago. He was at a warehouse I broke into. I met Dante's eyes. He's counsel. The young man's lips moved. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. Too late, he whispered. The serpent, already inside. Then his eyes went glassy and he was gone. Dante stood slowly, and I watched something dangerous crystallize in his expression. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single contact. Luca, where are you? A pause. Good. Stay there. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Another pause, and his jaw clenched. Because someone just tried to kill me in my own home, and I need to know who's still breathing on my side. He ended the call and immediately dialed another. Marco. Penthouse. Now. Bring everyone you trust and no one you don't. He turned to me, and in the dim light filtering through the smoke, he looked like something carved from stone and violence. You were right, he said quietly. The council is real. They're embedded. And they just made their first mistake. What mistake? They missed. He moved to the destroyed door, checking the hallway with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd survived by never assuming safety. Which means they're scared. Means we're close to something they can't afford for us to find. I joined him at the doorway, looking out at the wreckage of his home. Water from the sprinklers mixed with blood on marble floors. Smoke still curled through the air. Somewhere in the distance, NYPD sirens were getting closer. "They killed your consigliere," I said slowly, pieces clicking together in my mind. 3 months ago. They've been planning this. Which means they knew I was getting too powerful. Too independent. Dante's voice was cold calculation now, emotion locked away behind strategy. The council doesn't just control the families. They cull them when they get too strong. So, what do we do? He looked at me, and the smile that crossed his face was the most terrifying thing I'd seen all morning. "We burn their house down before they can burn ours." Footsteps thundered in the hallway. Dante raised his weapon, then lowered it as Marco appeared, flanked by 4 men with guns drawn. The enforcer's face was grim as he took in the destruction. "Boss, you're hit." I looked at Dante and realized for the first time that blood was seeping through his shirt sleeve. He glanced down at it with the kind of detached interest you'd give a paper cut. "Graze. I've had worse." He turned to Marco. "Sweep the building. I want every corpse cataloged, every identity confirmed." "And Marco? Check them for tattoos." "What am I looking for?" 5 serpents in a circle. Dante's voice carried deadly certainty. "The ones who have it aren't ours anymore. They never were." Marco's expression went carefully blank, but I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He nodded once and moved deeper into the penthouse with his men. Dante turned back to me, and despite the blood and the smoke and the bodies, his voice was almost gentle. "Still think we can win this?" I looked at the dead assassin on his study floor, thought about 3 years of running, thought about Marcus Vitali and every other person the council had erased like they were nothing. "I think," I said slowly, "that they just proved they're afraid of us. And fear makes people sloppy." "Good answer." He checked his gun, reloaded with smooth efficiency. "Because the war just started and I don't plan on losing." The sirens were at the building now. Red and blue lights strobed through the smoke. And somewhere in the city below, the council was watching, waiting to see if their message had landed. They'd find out soon enough. We weren't running anymore. The police left after 2 hours of questions that Dante answered with the kind of practiced ease that comes from decades of dancing with law enforcement. "Yes, officer." "No, officer. I have no idea who would want to attack me. Business dispute, perhaps. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation." They didn't believe him, but they also didn't have enough to hold him. Not with his lawyers already swarming the building like well-dressed sharks, and not with half the precinct probably on his payroll anyway. The cops took their photos, bagged their evidence, and left with the kind of frustrated resignation that suggested they knew exactly what would happen to this case: nothing. Marco had moved the bodies to the basement before the police arrived. "Standard procedure," Dante explained to me in a tone that suggested this wasn't his first time cleaning up an attack. The cops got crime scene photos of destruction and spent shells, but the actual corpses had vanished into whatever disposal system New York's underworld had perfected over the decades. Now we stood in the cold fluorescent light of the basement storage room, surrounded by concrete and steel and 4 dead men laid out on plastic sheeting. The smell was copper and gunpowder and something else, the particular scent of violent death that no amount of ventilation could quite erase. Marco had already photographed their faces, run prints when possible, searched their pockets. Everything by the book, the kind of meticulous documentation that would make a crime scene investigator weep with envy. Dante's operation ran on information, and even in death, these men had intelligence to give up. 3 unknowns, Marco said, gesturing to the first 3 bodies. "No ID, no prints in any database I can access. Professional clean. The kind of scrubbing you see with intelligence operatives or high-level contractors." He moved to the 4th. "This one's different. Antonio Greco, low-level soldier in the Castellano family. Reported missing 2 months ago after a collection run in Brooklyn." Dante crouched beside Antonio's body, studying the young man's face with clinical detachment. "The Castellanos have been quiet lately. Too quiet. I thought they were licking their wounds after losing 3 captains last year." Maybe they weren't licking wounds, I said quietly. Maybe they were being absorbed. Dante's eyes flicked to me, sharp with understanding. The council doesn't just control the families. They harvest them, pick them apart, and rebuild them as extensions of their own power. Check them, I said. All of them. For the mark. Marco looked between us, clearly wanting to ask questions, but knowing better. He moved to the first body, the young one who died in Dante's study, and began the methodical work of checking for tattoos. Arms, chest, back, neck. Nothing. The second body yielded the same result. Professional operators, clean of any identifying marks beyond the scars that spoke of hard lives and harder choices. But the third, one of the unknowns, Marco paused as he checked the man's ribcage. Boss, you need to see this. We moved closer. The tattoo was small, maybe 2 inches across, placed precisely where it would be hidden by clothing, but visible to anyone who got close enough. 5 serpents arranged in a circle, each one consuming the tail of the next, rendered in black ink so dark it looked like it had been burned into the skin rather than drawn. The council's mark. Dante's expression went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded hurricanes. He reached out with one gloved hand and traced the design without touching the skin. How many years have I been hunting shadows? How many enemies have I fought thinking they were rivals when they were just puppets on the same strings? Check the others, I said, though I already knew what we'd find. Marco continued his grim work. The young man from the study, no mark. But Antonio Greco, the missing Castellano soldier, had the same tattoo in the exact same location. Left ribcage precisely placed, like it had been put there in the same session by the same artist. That's how they do it, I said, pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. They don't recruit from the outside. They corrupt from within. Find soldiers who are ambitious or desperate or angry, and they offer them something better. Protection. Power. A seat at a table that supposedly doesn't exist. Dante stood, pulling off his gloves with sharp, angry movements. Antonio Greco disappeared 2 months ago. The Castellanos assumed he'd been killed or turned informant. But he wasn't missing, he was being converted. How many others? Marco's voice was tight. How many of our people have disappeared or died in the last year? The question hung in the cold basement air like a noose. Dante moved to a corner of the room where someone had set up a makeshift command center, a folding table, a laptop, files stacked in neat rows. He opened one of the files, began flipping through papers covered in names and dates. 12, he said finally. 12 men from various families reported missing or dead under suspicious circumstances in the past 18 months. All low to mid-level. All young enough to be useful, smart enough to be dangerous, ambitious enough to be tempted. 12 marks we know about, I corrected. How many more are walking around out there right now, wearing that tattoo under their shirts, reporting back to the council on every move you make? Marco's hand drifted to his weapon. We need to start checking. Everyone. Full medical inspection, surprise raids on the barracks, whatever it takes. And tip them off that we know? Dante shook his head. No. We do this smart. Quiet. We identify who we can trust absolutely, and we start building a list of suspects from there. He pulled out his phone, brought up a contact list that probably read like a who's who of New York organized crime. Luca, he said, more to himself than us. He's been with me since the beginning. Before I had power, before I had money. When it was just 2 kids from the Bronx who thought they could own the world. Your consigliera was with you even longer, I said gently. And he's dead. The words hit like a physical blow. I watched Dante absorb them, watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. Trust was the currency of his world, and I just devalued everything in his vault. We test them, he said finally. All of them. Even Luca. How? Marco asked. Dante smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd built an empire on being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. We give them information. Different information to different people. See what leaks, see who the council moves against. It's old tradecraft, but it works. That's dangerous, I said. If they realize you're testing them, then we're already dead anyway. He gestured to the bodies at our feet. They just tried to kill me in my own home, Elena. Subtlety is off the table. Now we move fast, hit hard, and we don't stop until every serpent is dead or we are. Marco was already on his phone, making calls in low, urgent tones. Gathering the inner circle, activating protocols that had probably been in place for years for exactly this kind of crisis. I looked down at Antonio Greco's body, at the tattoo that had marked him as something other than what he'd seemed. 23 years old, according to Marco's preliminary report. Barely old enough to drink legally, and he'd sold his loyalty to an organization that would have discarded him the moment he stopped being useful. We need to document this, I said. Photograph the marks, cross-reference them with my files. If we can establish a pattern, who gets recruited, when, under what circumstances, we might be able to predict their next moves. You think like an investigator, Dante observed. I was studying to be a lawyer once. Before everything went to hell, I pulled out my phone, started taking careful photos of the tattoos from multiple angles. The council operates like a legal conspiracy, lots of cutouts, lots of deniability. But every organization has patterns. Bureaucracy. Even criminal ones. Especially criminal ones, Dante agreed. He moved to stand beside me, looking down at the bodies with an expression I couldn't quite read. My father used to say that the mob was the most conservative organization in America. Same rules, same hierarchies, same loyalty oaths that go back centuries. We don't adapt well to change. That's what makes the council so dangerous, I said. They've adapted. They don't fight wars, they orchestrate them. They don't take territory, they manipulate the people who hold it. They're parasites that have learned to control the host. Marco ended his call and turned back to us. Inner circle meeting in 1 hour. Safe house in Midtown. I've got men sweeping it now for bugs and bombs. Good. Dante took one last look at the bodies, committing something to memory. Dispose of these. Deep disposal. I don't want the council knowing exactly what we found. What about the cops? Marco asked. They're going to want to know what happened to the shooters. Tell them the truth. They got away in the confusion. We're cooperating fully with the investigation. Dante's smile was razor-sharp. Let the council think their operation succeeded, at least partially. Let them think I'm scared and scrambling. Are you scared? I asked quietly. He turned those whiskey-dark eyes on me, and for a moment I saw past the armor to something human underneath. Something that had just realized the world he'd built might be rotting from the inside. Terrified, he admitted. But fear is just information. It tells you what matters, what's worth fighting for. And right now, what matters is burning the council to ash before they turn everyone I know into marked men. We left the bodies in the basement and went upstairs to prepare for war. The dress cost more than I'd spent on rent in 3 years of running. Midnight blue silk that clung in all the right places and fell in elegant waves to the floor, with a neckline that was just daring enough to be memorable without being scandalous. The bruise on my face had been covered with makeup applied by a professional who didn't ask questions and probably charged Dante more per hour than most people made in a week. I looked like someone else in the mirror. Someone who belonged at galas in Manhattan ballrooms instead of sleeping in her car outside all-night diners. The transformation was unsettling and perfect. You look terrified, Dante said from the doorway of the guest room. He'd cleaned up well too, black tuxedo that probably cost more than a used car, diamond cufflinks that caught the light, hair styled back to show the tattoos on his neck in sharp relief. He looked like exactly what he was, dangerous money wrapped in civilization's thinnest veneer. I am terrified. I turned from the mirror to face him. The last time I was in a room with these people, I barely made it out alive. You're not alone this time. He crossed the room and held out a small device no bigger than a button. Earpiece. Marco will be monitoring from a van outside. 2 words, red wine, and we extract you immediately. I fitted the earpiece, felt it nestle invisibly against my ear canal. What if they recognize me? They won't. You've been invisible for 3 years, and even before that you were just a paralegal no one noticed. Tonight you're Gabriella Romano, my date, a art consultant from Milan who doesn't speak much English. He handed me a small clutch purse. Inside is your panic button, phone with our secure line, and a very small but very effective knife. Just in case. I opened the clutch, saw the glint of steel nestled among the lipstick and compact. You think it'll come to that? I think we're walking into a room full of people, one of whom tried to kill me yesterday and has been hunting you for years. So yes, I plan for it to come to that. The gala was being held at the Sinclair Hotel in Midtown, one of those old money establishments that had hosted everyone from Rockefellers to modern-day robber barons. The Castellano family was throwing it, a charity auction for some cause that was probably just money laundering wrapped in tax deductions and good publicity. But everyone who mattered in New York's underworld would be there, and according to my files, the council often used these events to conduct business in plain sight. We arrived in a car that probably cost more than my parents' house, pulling up to a red carpet where photographers waited to document everyone's arrival. I felt my breath catch as the door opened and Dante offered his hand. "Smile," he murmured. "You're supposed to be enjoying yourself." I plastered on a smile and let him lead me through the gauntlet of camera flashes. The lobby was all marble and gold, crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across men in tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than cars. I recognized faces from news reports, from the files I'd studied obsessively. Vincent Castellano himself holding court near the bar, his silver hair and patrician features making him look more like a senator than a crime boss. The Moretti family underboss, Alessandro, with his wife on his arm and murder in his eyes for anyone who looked at her wrong. And others. So many others. A room full of predators pretending to be civilized. "Stay close," Dante said quietly, his hand on the small of my back as we moved into the ballroom. "Marco, you reading us?" Clear as crystal, boss, Marco's voice crackled in my ear. "I've got eyes on most of the room. Castellano's security is heavy but not unusual. No one's paying you special attention yet." Yet? The word hung there like a promise and a threat. We made our way through the crowd, Dante stopping occasionally to exchange pleasantries with people who smiled at him while their eyes calculated angles and opportunities. I played my part, nodding and smiling and speaking occasional Italian phrases I'd memorized that morning. An art consultant wouldn't know much about their world, wouldn't care about the violence that paid for these pretty parties. "Dante Vallo." The voice came from behind us, cultured and amused. "I heard you had some excitement at your place yesterday." "Terrible thing, home invasions." We turned. The man approaching was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that belonged on corporate boards and charity foundations. I didn't recognize him from my files, which made my pulse spike. "Vincent." Dante's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, unfortunate. But my security handled it. You know how it is." "I do indeed." Vincent Castellano's gaze slid to me, polite interest that felt like being examined under a microscope. "And who is this lovely creature?" "Gabriella Romano. This is Vincent Castellano, our host for the evening. Gabriella is visiting from Milan. Art consultant." I extended my hand with what I hoped was the right mix of European sophistication and detachment. "Piacere." Vincent took my hand, and I felt my blood run cold. Because as his sleeve shifted slightly with the movement, I caught a glimpse of something on his wrist. Just a hint, quickly covered, but I'd spent 3 years memorizing every detail of the council's marks. A serpent's head, the beginning of a circle. "The pleasure is mine." Vincent released my hand, his smile never wavering. "I hope you're enjoying our city, Gabriella. New York can be quite dangerous for those who don't know its nuances." "She's well protected," Dante said, and there was steel under the casual words. Of course, of course." Vincent gestured toward the ballroom. "Please enjoy the evening. The auction starts in an hour, and we have some remarkable pieces. Dante, perhaps we could speak later?" I have a business proposition that might interest you. I'll find you, Dante said. We moved away, and I felt sweat trickling down my spine despite the air conditioning. Marco's voice crackled in my ear. Got that. Running Vincent Castellano through expanded databases now. He has the mark, I whispered to Dante as we reached a quieter corner near the windows overlooking the city. On his wrist. I saw it. Dante's expression didn't change, but I felt the tension radiating off him. Vincent Castellano has been a major player for 20 years. If he's counsel, that means the Castellano family isn't just compromised. It's a counsel operation. I scanned the room with new eyes, seeing it differently now. How many others, Dante? How many people in this room are marked? Elena. Marco's voice, urgent now. You need to see something. Southeast corner, by the pianist. Gray suit, talking to Alessandro Moretti. I looked. The man in the gray suit had his back partially to us, but something about his posture, the way he moved. He turned slightly, and I saw his profile. The world tilted. I knew that face. Had seen it in the Philadelphia FBI office 3 years ago, taking my statement with concerned eyes and promises of protection. Special Agent David Chin, the man who'd interviewed me before I was picked up by fake FBI agents and nearly killed. That's him, I breathed. Marco, the man in gray. He's FBI. Or was. He's the one who. I see him, Marco said. Running facial recognition now. Elena, if he's here. Then the council's reach goes deeper than we thought. Dante's voice was deadly calm. They don't just control the families. They control law enforcement. They control everything. Agent Chin was laughing at something Alessandro said, completely at ease in a room full of criminals. He looked exactly the same as I remembered, average height, average build, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. Perfect for someone who needed to be invisible. Then he looked up and his eyes swept the room. They landed on me. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Calculation. And then it was gone, replaced by polite disinterest as he turned back to his conversation. But I'd seen it. And he knew I'd seen it. Red wine, I said quietly, invoking the extraction code. Negative, Dante overrode me. He's not sure yet. If we run, we confirm his suspicion. We stay, we play it out, and we follow him when he leaves. Dante. Trust me. His hand found mine, squeezed gently. I've been playing these games since before you were born. He's not certain. We can use that. The next hour was torture. We mingled, we smiled, we watched the auction where people bid obscene amounts of money on art and jewelry while I tracked Agent Chan from the corner of my eye. He never looked directly at me again, but I could feel him there, a predator pretending to graze. The auction was ending when Vincent Castellano found us again. Dante, that conversation? My study upstairs, if you don't mind. Bring your lovely companion if you wish. Some matters are better discussed in private. Every instinct screamed trap. But Dante smiled and nodded. Of course. Lead the way. As we followed Vincent through the ballroom toward a private elevator, I saw Agent Chin watching. And this time, he smiled. Marco, Dante said quietly. If we're not out in 20 minutes. I'm coming in, Marco finished. With everyone. The elevator doors closed, and we rose toward whatever waited in Vincent Castellano's private study. I felt the weight of the knife in my clutch and wondered if tonight would be the night my luck finally ran out. Dante's hand found mine in the elevator's privacy. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you don't die alone. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even reassuring. But somehow it was enough. The elevator opened onto a private floor that smelled of old books and older money. Vincent led us down a hallway lined with paintings that belonged in museums, past doors that probably opened onto rooms I couldn't even imagine. His study was at the end, a sprawling space of dark wood and leather that overlooked the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. But we weren't alone. Luca Santoro stood by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, looking every inch the underboss who'd helped Dante build an empire. He turned as we entered, and his smile was the same warm, brotherly expression I'd seen in photographs Dante kept in his penthouse. The man who'd been there since the beginning. The man Dante called brother. Luca. Dante's voice carried surprise, but not alarm. Not yet. Didn't expect to see you here. Vincent invited me. Said it was important. Luca's eyes slid to me, polite curiosity without recognition. This must be the famous Gabriella I've been hearing about. Something like that, Dante said carefully. Vincent closed the door behind us with a soft click that sounded too much like a lock engaging. He moved to a bar cart, poured himself a drink with unhurried elegance. Please sit. This won't take long. But neither Dante nor I sat. We stood in the center of that expensive study, and I felt the trap closing around us like jaws. I'll stand, Dante said. What's this about, Vincent? Efficiency, mostly. Vincent took a sip of his drink, savoring it. You've become a problem, Dante. A very expensive, very complicated problem. And problems, as you know, need solutions. The air in the room changed. I felt Dante's hand move slightly, positioning himself between me and the door without making it obvious. Luca remained by the window, but his posture had shifted. Less relaxed. More ready. What kind of problem? Dante asked, his voice dangerously calm. The kind that asks too many questions. The kind that starts connecting dots that should remain disconnected. Vincent set down his glass. The kind that brings home runaway assets and thinks he can dismantle an organization that's been running this city since before his father was born. The council, I said quietly. Vincent's smile was almost approving. She speaks. And here I thought you were just a pretty distraction. Tell me, Elena Vasquez. Yes, I know exactly who you are. How much have you told him? How much does Dante know about what you found in Marcus Vitali's office? Dante's hand moved to his jacket, but Luca was faster. The gun appeared in his hand with professional smoothness, not aimed directly at us, but present. A promise of violence held in check. Don't, Luca said softly. Please, Dante. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I watched Dante's face as he processed what was happening. Watched the betrayal land like a physical blow, watched years of trust shatter like the windows had in his penthouse. His best friend. His brother in everything but blood. The man he'd built his empire alongside. How long? Dante's voice was barely above a whisper. Since the beginning. Luca's expression was genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, brother. I really am. But the council offered something you never could: stability. Order. A world where the violence serves a purpose instead of just feeding itself. You killed Dominic. The words came out flat dead. My consigliere. You were with him when he died. You said you tried to save him. I did try. Luca's gun hand didn't waver. I liked Dominic. But he'd figured it out, same as you're figuring it out now. He'd started asking questions about the offshore accounts, about why certain decisions were being made. The council gave the order. I followed it. Jesus Christ, Luca. Dante took a step forward, and Luca's gun rose slightly in warning. We grew up together. We built this together. Everything I have, I shared with you. And I was grateful. I still am. Luca's voice carried genuine emotion, which somehow made it worse. But you were always going to be a problem, Dante. Too smart, too ambitious, too willing to buck the system. The council tolerates chaos, but only the chaos they orchestrate. You were becoming unpredictable. Vincent had moved behind his desk during this exchange, and I saw him press something underneath it. A silent alarm, probably. Summoning whoever he needed to clean up this mess. So what now? I asked. You kill us both? Make it look like a murder-suicide? Crime of passion at a charity gala. Nothing so crude. Vincent pulled out a phone, typed something. Dante will suffer an unfortunate heart attack before the night is over. Tragic, really. So young, so vital. The stress of yesterday's home invasion must have been too much. And you, Elena, will simply disappear. Again. Only this time, permanently. Marco knows where we are, Dante said. He'll come looking. Marco is currently dealing with a security situation at your club in Brooklyn. Anonymous tip about a bomb threat. He'll be occupied for hours. Vincent smiled. We've been planning this for weeks, Dante. Ever since Elena entered the picture. We knew she'd come to you eventually. She's been predictable in her desperation. The door opened behind us and Agent Chin walked in. Not in his gray suit anymore, but in the tactical gear I'd seen on the men who'd attacked Dante's penthouse. He had a syringe in his hand, something clear inside it that promised a quiet death disguised as natural causes. Hello again, Miss Vasquez, Chin said pleasantly. I told my superiors 3 years ago that we should have been more thorough. But they wanted information first, and you were too quick. We won't make that mistake twice. I felt Dante's hand find mine, felt his fingers squeeze once. A message. Trust me. Or maybe goodbye. I couldn't tell which. You can't kill everyone who knows, I said, buying time though I didn't know what for. There are copies of the files. Multiple locations. If I disappear, then they stay buried, Vincent interrupted. You're a paranoid woman who's been on the run for 3 years. Your files are encrypted, hidden, probably incomplete. Without you to authenticate them, they're useless. Just more conspiracy theories that no one will take seriously. Dante was calculating angles. I could see it in his eyes. 3 armed men, 1 exit, and me to protect. The math didn't work. We were going to die in this expensive study overlooking a city that didn't care. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in after a moment, dim red bulbs that cast everything in blood-colored shadows. Vincent cursed. Luca's gun swung toward the door. Chin moved toward me with the syringe raised. And Dante moved like violence incarnate. He hit Chin first, a strike to the throat that sent the agent stumbling backward, the syringe flying. I dove for it, my hand closing around the barrel as Dante closed with Luca. Brother fighting brother, years of training and shared experience, making it a dance of deadly familiarity. Vincent was reaching for something in his desk, a weapon, an alarm, something, when the study door exploded inward. Marco came through first, flanked by 4 men with guns drawn. Not his usual crew. These were faces I didn't recognize, harder men with the look of soldiers who'd seen real war. Drop it. Marco's voice cut through the chaos. All of you now. But Luca wasn't dropping anything. His gun swung toward Marco, and I saw Dante's face as he realized what was about to happen. Saw the choice crystallize in that split second, his brother or his loyalty, his past or his future. Dante grabbed Luca's gun hand and twisted. The shot went wild, punching through one of the expensive paintings. They grappled, 2 men who knew each other's moves too well, until Dante got leverage and slammed Luca against the wall hard enough to crack the wood paneling. Please, Luca gasped. Brother, please. You stopped being my brother when you killed Dominic. Dante's voice was hollow. When you marked yourself for the council. When you chose them over everything we built. Marco's men had Vincent and Chin on the floor, zip-tied and neutralized. The study that had been a trap moments ago was now secured, but the victory felt Pyrrhic. Broken glass and broken loyalties, and the ruins of everything Dante had believed in. Dante stepped back from Luca, his hands shaking. Get him out of here. All of them. Take them to the warehouse. I want to know everything, every council operative, every compromised family, every safe house and account. Everything. And if they don't talk? Marco asked. Dante's smile was terrible to see. Then we make them wish they had. As Marco's men hauled the prisoners away, I moved to Dante's side. He stood staring at the place where Luca had been, his expression carved from stone and grief. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Don't be. His voice was distant. You tried to warn me. That anyone could be marked, anyone could be corrupted. I didn't want to believe it could be him. How did Marco know to come? He didn't trust the bomb threat. Had someone else check it out while he positioned a team here? Dante turned to me finally, and his eyes were haunted. He saved our lives because he didn't trust Elena. Because he assumed betrayal. What kind of world have I built where that's the only way to survive? I didn't have an answer. Outside the broken study door, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone had called the police, probably hotel security responding to the gunshot. We needed to leave, needed to disappear before this turned into something that couldn't be explained away. But for a moment, we just stood there in the red emergency lighting, surrounded by the wreckage of trust and the cold certainty that the war we'd started was far from over. The council had been revealed. But revelation came with a price. And we just paid it in blood. The rain started as we hit the street, cold and vindictive, turning Manhattan into a noir painting of neon and shadow. Marco had gotten us out through the hotel's service entrance while his team created enough chaos in the lobby to occupy security and the arriving police. But we all knew this wasn't over. The council didn't lose assets like Vincent Castellano and Luca Santoro without responding with overwhelming force. We'd made it 3 blocks before the first shots rang out. The bullet took out the rear window of Marco's SUV, safety glass exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces. Marco yanked the wheel hard right, cutting through an intersection against the light while horns screamed and tires squealed. I was thrown against Dante, his arm coming around me automatically as another volley punched through the metal body of the vehicle. 2 cars behind us, Marco shouted from the driver's seat. Black sedans, professional drivers. They're boxing us in. Dante already had his gun out, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. How many men did you bring? For at the hotel, 2 more in the chase car behind us. Marco's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Boss, we're outnumbered. Story of my life. Dante looked at me, and in his eyes I saw calculation and something else, determination that bordered on reckless. Elena, get down. Stay down no matter what happens. Like hell. I pulled the small knife from my clutch, inadequate against guns but better than nothing. I didn't survive 3 years to die in the back of a car. The chase car behind us, one of Marco's vehicles with 2 of his men, swerved to intercept the lead pursuit vehicle. Metal screamed against metal as they collided, both cars spinning out across wet asphalt. Through the rear window, I watched one of Marco's men emerge, firing methodically at the crashed sedan before return fire cut him down. Shit. Marco's voice was tight. We just lost Polly. The second pursuit vehicle wasn't slowing. It accelerated through the wreckage, tires smoking, and pulled alongside us. The rear window rolled down and I saw the muzzle flash before I heard the shots, trained my whole life to process sound before sight, but evolution hadn't prepared anyone for modern violence. Dante fired back, his shots precise despite the movement. One of their tires exploded, sending their vehicle into a hydroplane skid. But more headlights were appearing in the mirrors, flooding through the rain like sharks sensing blood. How many? Dante demanded. At least 6 more vehicles. Boss, we can't outrun this. We need to hole up, call in reinforcements. Where? I asked, watching the city stream past. We were heading downtown now, away from the tourist zones into the industrial corridors where Manhattan's pretty face gave way to its working bones. Anywhere we stop, they'll pin us down. The old meatpacking plant on West Street. Marco was already adjusting course. Been abandoned for years, but I've kept it stocked. Weapons, supplies, escape routes. It's defensible. It's also a death trap if they surround us, Dante countered. Better than dying in traffic. Marco took a hard left, the SUV's tires screaming in protest. And we've got maybe 60 seconds before they cut off all our options. The meatpacking plant loomed out of the rain like something from an industrial nightmare, all rusted metal and shattered windows and the ghosts of a working-class Manhattan that didn't exist anymore. Marco crashed through a chain-link fence that had been left deliberately loose, and we skidded to a stop inside a loading bay that stank of decay and old blood. We were out of the vehicle before it fully stopped moving, Marco leading us through corridors he'd mapped in his mind while Dante covered our rear. I could hear the pursuit vehicles braking outside, doors slamming, voices calling orders in the professional cadence of military operations. The council had sent their best. Marco kicked open a door marked with a red X, revealing a room that had been converted into exactly what he'd promised, an armory. Rifles, shotguns, body armor, ammunition stacked in metal cases. Not enough to win a war, but enough to make the other side pay for their victory. "Vest," Dante ordered, shoving body armor at me. I struggled into it while he and Marco armed themselves with the efficiency of men who'd done this before. "Marco, where are the exits?" "3 options. Main entrance we came through, that's compromised. Roof access through the north stairwell, they'll have that covered in minutes. And the sewer tunnels underneath, but those flood when it rains like this. So we're trapped." I pulled the vest tight, felt its weight settle across my chest like a promise. "We make our stand here. Or we turn the trap around." Dante was checking a rifle, his movements calm despite the chaos bearing down on us. "They think they've cornered us. That makes them confident. Confident people make mistakes." The first explosion rocked the building, somewhere on the lower floor. Breaching charge, clearing their entry point. Then voices, getting closer, moving through the plant with tactical precision. "They're not taking prisoners," Marco said quietly. "The council wants this clean. No witnesses, no complications." Dante met my eyes across the armory, and in that moment I understood what he was thinking. We could hole up in this room, make them pay for every inch, but eventually they'd overwhelm us or burn us out. Or we could do what they wouldn't expect. "We go to them," I said. "Split up, use the building, make them hunt us in terrain we control." "That's suicide," Marco protested. "So is staying here." Dante was already moving, selecting weapons, filling pockets with spare magazines. "Elena's right. We use the environment, we split their focus, we make them commit resources to multiple threats. It's our only chance." Another explosion, closer now. They were moving faster than expected, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. We were out of time for planning. "Marco, take the east wing. Hit them from the flank, make them think we're trying to break out that direction." Dante handed me a smaller pistol, checked that I knew how to use it. "Elena and I will move toward the main entrance. Draw their attention, identify their command structure." "And then?" Marco asked. "Then we cut the head off the snake and hope the body stops moving." We split up at the armory door, Marco disappearing into the shadows of the east corridor while Dante and I moved toward the sounds of systematic invasion. The rain hammered against metal overhead, a percussion that masked footsteps and breathing and the thunder of my pulse in my ears. The first council operative we encountered died quickly, Dante's knife finding his throat before he could raise an alarm. We took his radio, his weapon, and kept moving through the industrial maze. Through the earpiece, I heard them coordinating, heard the calm professional voices reporting clear rooms and covered angles. Heard them call in reinforcements when Marco opened fire in the east wing. "All units, contact east side. At least 2 shooters, automatic weapons. Converge and eliminate." Dante smiled in the darkness, and it was the expression of a predator who'd just watched his prey make a fatal error. "They're committing everything to Marco's position. That means their command is exposed." We moved toward the main entrance, using shadows and cover and every trick that decades of surviving in a violent world had taught him. Through holes in the rusted walls I could see them, maybe 20 operatives in black tactical gear, professional killers who'd probably trained at Quantico or Bragg or whatever black site produced men who did the council's wet work. And behind them, directing operations from the relative safety of the entrance, I saw him. Special Agent David Chin, no longer pretending to be anything other than what he was. A council operative in government service, insurance against anyone who thought the law could touch them. "That's our target," I whispered. Dante nodded. We were outnumbered, outgunned, probably about to die in a condemned building while Manhattan's rain washed away the evidence of our existence. But if we could take Chin, if we could extract even a fraction of what he knew before the end, maybe the information would survive us. Maybe someone would pick up the thread we'd started pulling. Gunfire erupted from the east wing, Marco making his last stand, drawing their forces away. It was now or never. Dante looked at me one final time. Ready? I thought about 3 years of running. Thought about Marcus Vitali and all the other people the council had erased. Thought about the choice I'd made to stop being invisible, to drag these monsters into the light even if it killed me. Ready. We stepped out of the shadows into the rain and the violence, and the reckoning began. The shot that should have killed me hit the concrete column 6 inches to my left, sending stone fragments into my cheek like burning wasps. Dante returned fire without hesitation, his rounds punching through the tactical vest of the operative who'd gotten too confident in his approach. The man went down hard, and the others scattered, finally understanding that cornered prey could still have teeth. Chin was moving, retreating toward the entrance with the practiced speed of someone who'd survived by never being the last one standing. But Marco had circled back somehow, appearing from the smoke and chaos with his rifle raised, blocking the exit with the kind of cold certainty that said he was done running too. Nowhere to go, Marco called out. Drop it, Chin. Or whatever your real name is. For a moment, time suspended itself in the rain and gunfire. Chin stood in the entrance, weapon half raised, calculating odds that didn't favor him. His operatives were pinned down by crossfire, taking casualties, and the professional veneer was cracking to show something more desperate underneath. You think this ends anything? Chen's voice carried over the chaos. The council isn't 5 people in a room, Volo. It's a system. It's been running this city since before your grandfather made his bones. You can kill me, kill Vincent, torture Luca for every name he knows, and it won't matter. The structure remains. Maybe. Dante stepped forward, gun steady. But structures built on secrecy collapse when you drag them into the light. And that's exactly what we're about to do. I saw Chen's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the decision crystallize in his eyes. Better to die fighting than face whatever interrogation Dante had planned. But before he could fire, a new sound cut through the industrial ruins. Sirens. Lots of them. Growing louder. NYPD. The voice boomed through a megaphone. This is the police. Weapons down, now. Chen's expression flickered confusion, then calculation, then something almost like relief. He started to lower his weapon, probably planning to flash his federal credentials and spin some story about a sanctioned operation gone sideways. But the voice that came next wasn't from a beat cop. This is Assistant Director Sarah Martinez, FBI. I have a federal warrant for the arrest of David Chin and associated conspirators on charges of corruption, racketeering, and multiple counts of murder. All council operatives, you are surrounded and have no legal protection. Surrender immediately. I watched Chen's face drain of color. Around us, his operatives were hesitating, looking at each other with the dawning realization that they'd been cut loose. The council's protection, their immunity from consequences, had evaporated like rain on hot concrete. Dante's phone buzzed. He checked it one-handed, gun never wavering from Chen. His expression shifted surprise, then something that might have been grim satisfaction. It went out, he said quietly to me. All of it. Every file you had, every piece of evidence, every name and account. It's on every major news outlet, every law enforcement database, every congressional inbox. How? I breathed. Because I planned for this. He gestured with his gun toward Chin. Drop it. You've got 5 seconds before I decide the FBI can have what's left of you. Chin let his weapon fall, and his shoulders sagged with the weight of defeat. You can't prove anything. Good lawyers, jurisdictional disputes, classified information privileges. I don't need to prove it in court, Dante interrupted. The court of public opinion is already in session. And you know what happens when the spotlight hits the shadows? They disappear. Marco's men were moving in, securing the council operatives while NYPD and FBI flooded the building. I saw Assistant Director Martinez herself walking through the rain, flanked by agents who looked like they actually gave a damn about justice instead of just carrying badges for the council. She stopped in front of Dante, took in the weapons and the bodies and the wreckage of the brief war we'd fought. Mr. Volo, we got your package. All of it. I've spent the last 6 hours activating every trustworthy agent I could find, coordinating with SDNY prosecutors, and preparing for the shitstorm that's about to hit every level of law enforcement and organized crime in this city. How many? Dante asked. How many were compromised? Too many. Martinez's expression was grim. But not all of us. There are still people who took the oath seriously. And now we have the evidence to clean house, even if it takes years. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw recognition in her eyes. Elena Vasquez. You've been on a lot of watch lists for a long time. Different lists than you probably thought, though. Some of us have been looking for you too. For the right reasons. I couldn't risk it, I said quietly. Not after Philadelphia. Philadelphia was compromised top to bottom. Chin made sure of that. Martinez gestured to her agents. Take him. And get EMTs in here. We've got wounded. As they hauled Chin away, his face blank now, already planning legal strategies that wouldn't save him, Martinez turned back to us. This doesn't make you clean, Valo. You're still going to have to answer questions. Lots of them. But you just helped us take down the largest criminal conspiracy in American history. That buys you some latitude. How much latitude? Dante asked. Enough to walk out of here tonight. What happens tomorrow? She shrugged. That depends on how cooperative you are with the investigation. And how many bodies we find that can't be explained away. Dante nodded slowly. We'll talk. But not tonight. Tonight, I bury my dead and figure out what's left of my organization. Martinez didn't argue. She had bigger fish to fry, dozens of arrests to coordinate, evidence to secure, a conspiracy that reached into every corner of New York's power structure to untangle. We were just two more pieces in a puzzle that would take years to fully solve. As the emergency services worked and the rain finally began to ease, I found myself standing in the loading bay where this had started, looking out at the city that had tried to kill me so many times. Manhattan's lights sparkled through the dissipating storm, indifferent and eternal. What now? I asked Dante, who'd come to stand beside me. Now. He was quiet for a long moment. Now we figure out how to live in a world where the rules just changed. The council's broken, but nature abhors a vacuum. Every family in the city is going to scramble for position, try to fill the power void. It'll be chaos for months, maybe years. And you? I'm tired, Elena. The admission seemed to cost him something. Tired of the violence, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of wondering which of my people are really mine. Maybe it's time to build something different. Something that doesn't require quite so much blood to maintain. I looked at him. This dangerous man who'd become an unlikely ally, who'd risked everything on the word of a woman he barely knew, who'd watched his brother's betrayal and kept fighting anyway. You think they'll let you? I asked. The other families? The feds? Everyone who's going to want their pound of flesh now that the council's protection is gone. Probably not. He smiled, tired but real. But I'm good at surviving impossible odds. And now I've got something I didn't have before. What's that? You. He turned to face me fully. You spent 3 years collecting intelligence on the most powerful criminal organization in history. You know how they think, how they operate, what mistakes they made. That's worth more than an army. I'm not, I started, but he cut me off. You are. Whether you want to be or not. You can't go back to being invisible, Elena. Not after this. So the question is, what do you want to build with the visibility you've earned? I thought about that. About Marcus Vitali and the paralegal who'd stumbled into the wrong office. About 3 years of motels and fear and running. About the moment in an alley when I decided to stop running and drag the monsters into the light. Justice, I said finally. Real justice. Not the kind that comes from guns and fear, but the kind that actually means something. The kind that makes sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. That's a tall order. So was surviving the council. Dante laughed, genuine and surprised. Fair point. He held out his hand, formal despite everything we'd been through. Partners then? You bring the investigation skills and the evidence. I bring the street knowledge and the resources. We figure out how to build something better in the ruins of what just burned down. I looked at his hand, scarred knuckles, platinum watch, the weight of violence and power and hard choices. Looked at the city beyond him, wounded but surviving, always surviving. Looked at the future that neither of us had expected to see. I took his hand. Partners. In the distance, news helicopters were circling, drawn by the police activity and the story that was already breaking across every channel. The council exposed. Decades of corruption brought to light. The biggest organized crime takedown in history unfolding in real time. We'd won. But winning felt less like triumph and more like standing in the wreckage of everything we'd known, trying to imagine what came next. Marco approached, blood on his shoulder but walking steady. Boss, we've got problems. Half the crews are calling in, asking for direction. The other half aren't answering at all. And the families are already making moves. Moretti hit 3 of our operations in Brooklyn. Castellano's remnants are fortifying in Queens. It's going to be a bloodbath. Then we don't give them a bloodbath. Dante's voice carried new certainty. We offer them something they haven't had in decades, honest dealing. No council pulling strings, no invisible hands orchestrating wars. Just business, with rules everyone can see. They'll never go for it, Marco said. They will if the alternative is federal indictments. I pulled out my phone, showed them the news alert. Every family with council ties is about to be under investigation. The smart ones will take the deal. The stupid ones will give us an excuse to eliminate the competition. Marco looked between us, something like understanding dawning. You're not just trying to survive. You're trying to take over. Not take over, Dante corrected. Rebuild. There's a difference. The assistant director was calling for us, more questions that couldn't wait. We'd be here for hours, giving statements, negotiating terms, trying to spin the narrative in a direction that didn't end with all of us in federal prison. But for just a moment, standing in that ruined loading bay with the rain stopping and the dawn threatening on the horizon, I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. The council was broken. The serpent's circle was shattered. And in the space it left behind, maybe, just maybe, we could build something better. Or maybe we'd just create new monsters to replace the old ones. Either way, I wasn't running anymore. And that made all the difference.